We're calling this meeting to order now. It is 7:03 on June 13th, 2023, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland's Police Accountability Commission. If the Spanish language interpreters, Lizette and Carolina, can please give this information on Spanish language and interpretation.
Buenas noches. Esta reunión pública está sujeta a la ley del Estado de Oregón y a las normas administrativas de la ciudad de Portland y será grabada. Se dispondrá de interpretación al español para esta reunión. Al acceder a la interpretación al español, verá la señal de video de los oradores, pero esta señal de audio será sustituida por la de la intérprete. Para acceder a ella, haga clic en el icono Interpretación en los controles de la reunión de Zoom, que está en la parte inferior de su pantalla, y seleccione Español. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Katie and Gina. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretations throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. Please note that this is an automatic captioning service and is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to public meetings notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation in other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland's administrative code and an Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using the Zoom's Q&A feature as the commissioners are presenting and discussing things. If attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation in the future. Question and answer.
Is it just me or is
Click.
Amita, your audio is cutting in and out.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that as well.
Okay, so just quickly pick up and then while we figure out the audio issues there. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature as the commissions are presenting and or discussing items. If attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings and agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and answer will be visible to you and become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I'll pass it over to co-chairs for the land acknowledgement and then let Amita pick back up.
Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Samir. For tonight's land acknowledgement, we are going to be using an acknowledgement that was graciously provided to us by the BIPOC caucus of the Oregon legislature. Indigenous tribes and bands have been with the lands that we inhabit today throughout Oregon and the Northwest since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of Oregon today. We would like to express our respect to the first peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, Burns Paiute Tribe, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, Coquille Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. It is important that we recognize and honor the ongoing legal and spiritual relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. The interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place, and thank them for continuing to share their traditional ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another and the land, so it can take care of us. We commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands. We live in a nation of wealth created by the subjugation and exploitation of African people brought to Turtle Island through chattel slavery. We ground our fight knowing that there is no Black liberation without Indigenous sovereignty, and there is no Indigenous sovereignty without Black liberation. We fight for land back and reparations and refute settler colonialism, anti-Black racism, and imperialism. We invite you to join us in acknowledging all of this as our shared responsibility to make good use of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Co-Chair Casey, can we please put the community agreements? Thank you. Please take a moment to read these. There are 3 pages worth of community agreements. Thank you. Thank you. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members in gently with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in the space while still respecting community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to the following community agreements for today's meeting and to gently call in colleagues and collaborators? Can you please drop thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. I will now pass it over to co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
Thank you very much. So we are currently in our 5th and second to last phase of our work, which is the transition plan and broader system phase plan. Broader system phase, end of sentence. This is lasting through May to early July of 2023. So we anticipate having areas of agreement for the full commission to vote on in late June, early July. And we'll be able to complete our work in that phase and move into our final phase in which we are going to be focusing on public engagement, codifying our recommendations, and wrapping up the work that we've done over the past year and a half. At which point it will the ball will be in the city council's court. So we have 2 subcommittees in this phase. We have the subcommittee on the transition plan, which is the one other than this one, working on how we are going to get from the state of our current system to the new system that we have envisioned in all of our other phases of work. And we have the current subcommittee that we are in now, which is the broader system subcommittee, imagining how the new system of accountability is going to interact with and exist within all of the other sort of bodies, both policymaking and advisory, that exist not just on a city level, but in the county, state, and country. So we are currently working on formulating areas of agreement that will ultimately be voted on by the subcommittee and then sent to the full commission for consideration. And this just shows sort of where we are in the full process, sort of in context. And here are some of our upcoming meetings and events that the public is always welcome to attend and interact with members of the commission and bring your thoughts and input.
Thank you. Would you like to discuss what you're doing today? Or today we will discuss the first draft of the areas of agreements on broader systems. Starting with an introduction of the documents by co-chairs. This document has not yet been reviewed by the full subcommittee. So today is the first time most members will be seeing the complete text for most of the section. No decision on the document is expected today. We will then do the first pass of the document, including updates from drafting groups. We may jump around the document a little bit. We will discuss items and flag others for further discussion. Finally, we'll discuss next steps and then have public comment. I will now pass it back to the co-chairs to start the framing of the discussion.
Thank you very much. So as Ayomide mentioned, this is the beginning of the conversation around this. So each of the members of the subcommittee were assigned one or multiple areas of sort of this subcommittee's work to put together some initial thoughts and proposals, which were then sent to our staff, sort of synthesized into this initial document that is now before the full subcommittee for review. So everything that is in this document has been a part of that process, and this is the first time that the full subcommittee is getting the opportunity to review all of these proposals, potentially comment on or change any of the things that are in it, with the ultimate goal of having a draft that we can then consider as a whole in one of our upcoming subcommittees. That will then be approved by the subcommittee, sent to the full commission, and ultimately be before the full commission for further potential edits, review, and approval, and then a vote of the full commission to become an areas of agreement document that will then be turned into city code in the next phase. So that is what the process from now, which is very much sort of the raw materials of the work that our subcommittee members have been doing, will be sort of turned into what actually comes out of the full process.
Thank you. We will now move to the discussion of the draft areas of agreements and agreement on broader systems, and can walk through the outline document and some other resources if needed. For the first pass through the document, we will be using the 5-minute rule, where any discussion or proposed change isn't resolved within 5 minutes, gets paused and then moved to something with further will be made to be further discussed, will be flagged for further discussion. We will ask for the following normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated. Remember, I use a weighted stack. Please be forward-looking in your comments. And I will pass it back to co-chairs to start digging into the document. Staff, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag that co-chairs, I think there may be an audio issue there, so for co-chairs. So just wanted to flag that as per normal structures, the introduction is going to get visited last. That's standard practice for the PAC at this point. And then also co-chairs have said we're going to skip over section A2 and circle back to it at the end. So the otherwise top to bottom is what they said. I think he might be back now, Co-Chair KC.
Yes, And I just want to flag sort of the reasoning behind us doing those things in that order. I think that in the sections beside A2, which is the one that deals with the way that existing boards, advisory boards, and committees will either become a part of the work of the oversight board or will otherwise interact with the oversight board. We want there to be more time for discussion with some of those other committees, more time for public input, and also time for the members of this subcommittee to consider some of the sort of more big picture proposals of how some of these transitions will work, and what effect that will have on the decisions of what to do with each of these other bodies. So because we think that's going to be a longer and more involved discussion and want to give people an opportunity to sort of see what we discussed today, collect their thoughts, and be able to come back to that discussion at our next meeting, we're going to deal with some items this week that we are hoping at least will be some less complicated discussions, and sort of save some of the harder stuff for when we have more time for it.
Wonderful. So we're starting out with A, the Oversight Board and City Government.
Yes, so we wanted to have some sort of context setting right up front with this section. So the beginning is the general relationship with other parts of the city government. So the Oversight Board will be a part of city government, subject to all laws, rules, and policies which affect city government generally, including the city charter, city code, and administrative rules such as human resources policy. The Oversight Board will supervise an independent bureau as part of its charter-mandated independent judgment, which includes non-interference in its required duties and roles from other parts of city government. The director will be a bureau director as defined by the charter. The board will develop working relationships with other parts of city government to ensure its ability to participate in relevant city processes related to the tasks required of the Oversight Board by law or regulation. These include the Portland Police Bureau, Mayor, City Council, Bureau of Human Resources, City Attorney's Office, and Office of Government Relations. So I will stop there and see if anyone has any feedback so far.
Is there anything urgent you want to flag for discussion in this section at all?
All right, so I think we can scroll down to next section.
A3?
All right, so as mentioned, we'll return to A2. A3 deals with the impact of Oversight Board implementation on existing city staff entities. So sorry, I'm having a sizing issue with my, I'll have it right back. Okay. The Portland Police Bureau Internal Affairs. The Oversight Board will investigate most complaint types which currently are handled by PPB Internal Affairs. The only complaint types which currently go to PPB Internal Affairs that would not go to the Oversight Board are complaints filed by officers about conduct not affecting any community member, where the complainant officer does not choose to have the board investigate. For these cases, this work shall be transferred to the Bureau of Human Resources or equivalent agency within city government, but outside of both PPB and the Oversight Board. Internal Affairs shall sunset following the creation of the board and conclusion of its work addressing complaints received prior to the Oversight Board's full implementation. So before we get into sort of the discussion of this, I just wanted to address sort of a couple points that have come up with this. First, I think the figuring out where complaints will be dealt with that are not coming under the purview of the Oversight Board itself, given the fact that the sort of narrow set of complaints that fit that actually seem to fit very much into the sort of inter-coworker kind of disputes that make sense to be under HR anyway. That is sort of the intent with then having that work be transferred to the Bureau of Human Resources. And then second, sunsetting internal affairs, just to be clear to everyone involved, does not mean that the officers who do internal affairs investigations are going to be no longer employed. They will still be sworn police officers at the Portland Police Bureau, and will be able to then be a resource for all of the other things that we need police officers to be doing right now. So by transferring this work to the investigators who are now going to be under the oversight board, we will have more police officers available to do other investigatory work, because that task will be taken up by this new bureau with its own funding under the city charter and everything. So just to clarify that completely when we were talking about sunsetting internal affairs. And then with that said, I will open this up for discussion.
Thank you for that, Chair Casey. Is there anything urgent you'd like to flag for discussion or further discussion in this section? Okay. Let's see, Sarah. I see you had your hand raised. Attorney General, or excuse me, Deputy Attorney Sarah Ames.
Deputy City Attorney Sarah Ames, she, her pronouns. Thank you for calling on me. I just wanted to check. I don't believe you've had the opportunity to meet with representatives from Human Resources yet. My understanding is that Human Resources does not investigate these types of complaints for any bureau at this point. They do not have the staff to do that. Rather, they have the bureaus investigate, this managers do their investigations in consultation with the HR bureau. That is my understanding. And so I just wanted to raise that as a question, whether you have had a chance to consult and see if this is a feasible proposal.
Thank you. Staff?
Just a quick process note, the Bureau of Human Resources is the only entity required for the PAC to consult with that hasn't happened yet. All the other, I think 15 entities have briefed, and this is in progress right now, trying to schedule that and get it to happen. So it is correct that that hasn't happened yet, and happy to add a comment so that that can be flagged for a question for them. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that clarification. And I think that we can work that language once we have heard from them to basically make it clear that we are trying to fit the process that will be occurring here in these kinds of cases to sort of align it with the process that would occur in similar cases in other bureaus.
Any other comments or questions? After staff is finishing writing this flagged item.
All right, so moving on to the next paragraph, other parts of the Portland Police Bureau. The Oversight Board and Bureau will maintain a working relationship with the PPB Professional Standards Division, including staff working on the Employment Information System. This relationship will be beneficial to the board having access to information necessary to fully consider and investigate complaints. To avoid confusion as the Oversight Board implements a position that may have the same title, the Police Accountability Commission requests that the PPB retitle the position currently titled Inspector General so that the community may be clear as to which position provides independent monitoring. And this is something that we've discussed with staff, perhaps having a more broad language, basically saying that the the new oversight board should work with city agencies to generally iron out any confusion that may come with the creation of new positions, new titles, and to make sure that everything is sort of named as accurately and informatively to the public as possible. So does anyone have any questions or comments about this section?
Commissioner Iona.
So I think, and I don't know the answer, but I sort of feel like I remember hearing that the employee information system was not intended to be used as part of the disciplinary process. And again, I'm not sure that's true, but if it is true, then it sort of seems like it to me implies that the oversight board might have access to the information, and since the oversight board's dealing with complaints and investigations of discipline, I thought that might be an issue to think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Iona. Any other comments or questions? And please take your moment. Please take your time. If there are no other proposed changes or questions or comments, I believe we can move on. If that's okay with the commissioner.
Yes. All right, next we're going to be moving on to the section about coordination with and relationship with the county government. So section 1 on policy coordination and subject matter expertise. As per the area use of agreement on structural oversight, the board may officially endorse legislation / policy ideas and shall have the authority to testify in front of relevant government bodies and communicate its policy positions with employees and elected officials at any level of government. So what we've already said, just making it clear that goes for the county. Any questions, comments on that section? Not seeing any. Moving on to the next section. Is the relationship with the district attorney. The board shall collaborate to the extent allowable under law with the Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County District Attorney's offices, including information sharing where appropriate. To ensure officers' constitutional rights, in no case shall compelled testimony from officers be transferred to DA offices. And to be clear, the reason that those 3 counties are the ones that are enumerated is that those are the 3 counties that each contain some portion of the city of Portland, although Multnomah contains the vast majority. In the rare event that a subpoena is issued and needs to be enforced, the board shall apply to the appropriate county authority for the enforcement of a subpoena or to impose the penalties for failure to obey a subpoena or order. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall exchange information with the district attorney's offices, including seeking access to court records and case information pertinent to complaints under investigation. And D, the Oversight Board through legal counsel shall work with the district attorney's offices to determine appropriate disclosure of public records and protection of confidential information, including through clarifying or appealing to the DA's offices.
Any comments or questions? Or proposed changes? Okay. It seems like everybody seems to be okay with this.
All right, then let's move on to the next section. Exchange of information with/about other law enforcement agencies. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall maintain a working relationship with the Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County Sheriff's Offices, as well as each county's corrections agencies, and with oversight groups for these entities. This relationship will be beneficial to the board fulfilling its duties due to police collaborations and joint operations and police activity with relation to county-run jails. Any comments on this section?
Any questions?
Seeing none, let's move on to the next section. Other county relationships. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall exchange information pertinent to complaints under investigation with the county's medical examiner's offices. The Oversight Board and Bureau may seek membership for a representative in Multnomah County's local public safety coordinating council to assist with developing working relationships and exchanging information in pursuit of oversight goals and responsibilities. Any comments or questions on this section?
Commissioner Iona?
Just a quick comment. It'd be interesting to hear about why this is important. That's all. And I don't need to know now, just, I'm curious, thanks.
Commissioner Seamon?
Yeah, the LIPSIC acronym was my inclusion. LIPSIC is Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. Is their statute? They're created by statute. Sorry, I can't even speak. Within Multnomah County systems, and they actually consist and consolidate communication within all local public safety partners, including from PPBs, Chief Fromm and Chief Lavelle, to the sheriffs, to the DAs, including the criminal court systems and whatnot. So being that the entire object for LIPSIC is to engage in activities to be able to improve and reform the criminal justice systems. So I figured that that also would provide a direct connection and a pathway to communicate with since this LIPSIC is headed by the county chair, also a form of tool to be able to hear back as well as transfer and receive information from Multnomah County.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or proposed changes?
All right, I think we can move on then. So next section is relationship with state government. First section, obligation to follow state law. The Oversight Board is obligated to follow all applicable state laws and rules, including the Oregon Constitution and protecting the rights of all parties under the state constitution, collective bargaining agreements as per the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Act, public records and public meetings law, and as of July 1st, 2025, the statewide discipline guides. Policy coordination and subject matter expertise. As per the areas of agreement on structural oversight, the board may officially endorse legislation/policy ideas and shall have the authority to testify in front of relevant government bodies and communicate its policy positions with employees and elected officials at any level of government, which is the same text that we had at the county level as well. So does anyone have any comments on either of these sections?
Staff.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag for those who, it hasn't been said, I don't think explicitly, the highlighted text is a direct copy paste from the previously approved PAC areas of agreement on structural oversight. There was a note that in particular the state There are a couple entities like the State Law Enforcement Standards Commission, Oregon Statewide Commission on Law Enforcement Standards and Discipline Conduct. Sorry, but that includes appointed officials. So that's the co-chair note in the comment, and that has been placed into the garden plot for when that document gets revisited. And if it gets revisited and updated, this text would also be updated then. So just to keep it consistent across where it's citing previous PAC actions.
Thank you, staff. Are there any questions or comments regarding staff's comment or this portion of the document?
All right, let's move on to the next section. Exchange of information with / about other law enforcement agencies. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall maintain a working relationship with the Oregon State Police, including the State Medical Examiner's Office, as well as the Department of Corrections, and with oversight groups for these entities. This relationship will be beneficial to the board fulfilling its duties due to police collaborations and police activity with relation to state-run jails, prisons, and detention centers. Support of state court consideration of cases involving officers or incidents subject to complaint. The board shall collaborate to the extent allowable under state law with state courts and prosecutors, including information sharing where appropriate, to ensure officers' constitutional rights. In no case shall compelled testimony from officers be transferred by the Oversight Board. So I will stop there before we move on to the next bullet point and sort of explain that. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this section? Not hearing any, we have sort of a placeholder next in terms of the ways in which the Oversight Board will be able to be involved in sort of policy making around arbitration and the Employment Relations Board, but that still needs to be expounded upon and filled in. So for now, we will move on to the next section.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure that no one has questions about this particular portion of the section you talked about, Commissioner Casey.
Certainly.
Does anyone have any questions about arbitration or in this particular section? Staff.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to suggest that if members have thoughts on this, this is not something that there was a framing discussion in previous meetings of the subcommittee on many of the other subsections in the document. So if there's anything sort of conceptual that maybe a desired relationship that might be helpful to those drafting this text for the next time, that might ensure that that text can be drafted in a way that is comprehensively reflects at least most of the members' thoughts. I'm not sure if anyone has any opinions on that, but it might be helpful if you do.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Cameron.
Yeah, I've been looking into arbitration, and I'm still learning about it and trying to figure it out and understanding how it relates to this, but I'm not there yet, but I just wanted to say that I'm working on that. Thanks.
Are there any specific questions that you might have?
Not that I can, not that I can formulate right now, but yeah, thanks.
I know one thing that I think our staff are looking into and that I'm certainly interested in is the process by which arbitrators are chosen or placed into sort of the arbitration pool. And so I think that is something that we will hopefully be able to follow up on.
That was my question. That was it. Thanks. Thanks, Commissioner Casey.
I knew it was in there. I could feel it. Okay. Any other comments or questions specific to this section and also anything about arbitration? Okay, we'll definitely come back to that follow-up for Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Casey.
All right, next section. Relationship with federal government, obligation to follow federal law. The Oversight Board and bureaus are obligated to follow all federal laws, including the United States Constitution and protecting the rights of all parties under the U.S. Constitution, and the United States Department of Justice versus City of Portland Settlement Agreement. Implementation of the Oversight Board is obligated to follow the Settlement Agreement, paragraph 195. Policy coordination and subject matter expertise. And this is the same paragraph that was pulled from our structural oversight areas of agreement that we discussed previously in both the, I'm being asked to read slower for our interpreter, and I apologize profusely for not doing so. I get going sometimes, so I'll slow things down. But the paragraph to reiterate is, the board may officially endorse legislation/policy ideas and shall have the authority to testify in front of relevant government bodies and communicate its policy positions with employees and elected officials at any level of government. So are there any comments or questions on either of these sections? And I know there's going to be more work under the transition phase subcommittee regarding what the how this body will in fact sort of fit into the United States Department of Justice versus City of Portland settlement agreement. Not seeing any hands raised, I think we can move on to the next paragraph. Relationship with other oversight entities. The Oversight Board should seek to be a model for other jurisdictions that review and adapt their own oversight systems. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall also maintain a working relationship with oversight entities outside of Portland to exchange information, best practices, and solutions to barriers faced by entities working on law enforcement oversight. The Oversight Board and Bureau shall maintain a working relationship with regional, national, and international groups focused on law enforcement oversight to have access to trainings and conferences that can help the Oversight Board perform its duties more effectively. Are there any questions on this section?
See, shaking hands, no. Staff, and then I have a question.
Yeah, so just wanted to flag that this last one, there's a citation that we added just in the interest of transparency, noting it, that in board membership, there was a section about having access to optional additional trainings for members of the Oversight Board, and groups like that fall into that third category would have it there. And then also that there's been a conversation or two at the full commission around being a model for it for other groups around the country. So thanks.
Thank you, staff. Before we move on, I noticed that Commissioner Glenn had been popped out. So I want to make sure that there weren't any other comments or questions that you had, since you weren't in the room. Oh, there you are.
No, actually trying to log on my phone as well. I don't know what's going on with my internet. So thank you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Staff.
Yeah, so been a little bit behind on some of the other questions that have been coming in, but before, since we're not yet moved off of this one, there are two comments in the Q&A that I'll put in the chat for transparency here that may relate to this section. And one is the subcommittee contemplating relationships with oversight like internal affairs of local police departments as well. And the other is on section E, what standards of assessment will be used to determine best practices? What will be the rod of measurement? So not sure if any proposed changes result or just comments, but either way, I wanted to make sure those were available. Thanks.
Certainly, I'm happy to speak to my opinion on each of those questions. which is not necessarily the opinion of the full subcommittee or the full commission or anyone other than me. But I will say, I think that we have attempted to draft this in such a way that the board, by its own discretion, could maintain relationships with any entity that it sees as potentially informing best practices, or potentially having something to add to the work of the board. So I think that is, are we contemplating those relationships? I think that's something that, in my opinion, at least, I would like to leave up to the board itself, what relationships will be useful to its work. And then in terms of what standards of assessment will be used to determine best practices, I imagine that will be the work of many years determining exactly how to measure those and then how to implement them. And that is something that, again, I think that we are providing as much guidance in terms of what we want the outcomes to be as possible. But given the sort of ever-changing landscape and the amount of work that's going into setting up this board and setting up all of its processes, I think that it will be up to the board itself to determine what ultimately the outcome measures should be in terms of how to analyze and refine their practices.
Sorry to interrupt. This is the sign language interpreter. I think it'll be useful if you just leave both of our screens on, because the switching is leaving us without interpretation.
Well,
Yeah, just a moment on that.
thank you for that. I was just going to say, if there aren't any other comments, we can go to break and then we can make sure that that gets taken care of. Okay, we will come back at 8:10. So I'll give you 20 minutes. Thank you. All right. We'll go back to our discussion. If we could have the document placed back up so we can go back.
You back? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the document to come back up.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're recording. Thank you, staff. So I just want to make sure that we were finished with section E before we move on to anything else. Co-Chair Casey.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move on, not seeing any hands or other indications that people want to speak.
Okay. Co-Chair Simo. Okay, just want to make sure we're getting the double thumbs up. Okay. So we are moving to
Going to A2 right now, or are we going to the introduction, co-chairs?
I would start with the introduction.
Got it.
All right, so this is going to be the segment that sort of provides context for all of the rest of the things in our areas of agreement document. So I will go through the entire paragraph or entire series of paragraphs, and then we can open it up for discussion on whether there's anything we should add, remove, or change. All right. And could you scroll up like one stitch? I have a little thing at the top of that covers up the top sentence. That's perfect. The Police Accountability Commission is tasked with developing the new police accountability system in Portland, including the new Community Police Oversight Board. As part of ensuring the Oversight Board and Bureau can be effective in completing their duties, the Commission was also tasked with determining appropriate involvement between the new system and other parts of city government, as well as relationships with other levels of government. The Commission was also tasked with determining how implementation of the new system will impact parts of the current police oversight system in the city, including determining which parts will continue or cease to function and how. The PAC's proposed system will be bound by all relevant law and regulations, including at the federal, state, county, and city levels. It will be a part of the City of Portland government with independent judgment guaranteed in the charter. It will also have strong working relationships with many other layers of government as described below. The Oversight Board will make clear in its discussion with any levels of government that it is representing its own views and not serving as a representative of the city government. So that is going to be our introduction to this section. Does anyone have any thoughts on that section of text?
Comments?
I will comment that, oh, never mind. I think you may have already fixed it. No, the sentence that starts the commission, it should read the commission was also tasked rather than the commission as also tasked. I know it's small, but may as well catch it now.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions or additions?
All right.
I guess we can move on.
So I believe that leaves A2.
Mhm.
So this is sort of an amalgamation of recommendations from a number of subcommittee members, as well as not yet incorporating some of the things that we have discussed in previous draft documents. And that's because we wanted to take sort of a higher level look at what the potential relationships between the new oversight board and existing entities are going to be and what the potential processes will be for those relationships before we start getting into the individual discussions around each individual entity and what sort of should be done with that. Just because when we're having those discussions, I thought that it would be helpful to be able to have a framework for saying, okay, if we're going to, continue to work with this board, or if this board is going to become a subcommittee of the oversight board, what does that mean? What are we actually saying when we say those things? So I will go through this section as it currently reads. I'm sure we will have some conversation to have for that. And then we will either tonight or I think majority at our next meeting have an opportunity to go sort of committee by committee and have discussions about where our recommendations should be that each of them sort of fit into this new oversight system that we are building. So A2 reads, many of the current advisory groups related to police and policing will not be directly impacted by implementation of the oversight board. The city has already determined that 2 of the remaining advisory groups related to police and policing, the Police Accountability Commission itself and the Citizen Review Committee, will sunset as part of Oversight Board implementation. Some groups may have their workloads adapted to reduce redundancy and avoid community confusion. To provide them with increased independence as well as access to the board's investigatory and analytical resources, to avoid confusion from the public, and to be an efficient use of city resources in support of volunteers, some groups will be incorporated into the Oversight Board. Advisory groups being incorporated into the Oversight Board shall be maintained as distinct subcommittees of the Oversight Board for at least 2 years. Members of groups being incorporated into the new oversight board, as well as of groups being adopted as a result of implementation, shall be guaranteed an appointment as a board alternate during the transition period if they meet board eligibility requirements. These volunteers may also apply and be considered for oversight board membership. Whether board members or alternates, volunteers who were previously a member of an advisory group that is incorporated into the Oversight Board shall be assigned as full voting members of the Oversight Board subcommittee that is a successor to the incorporated group. Do we want to stop and discuss that, or does it make sense to go into the next?
I would suggest keep going.
All right. Representatives from the Oversight Board and other advisory committees will meet periodically in public to discuss emerging issues and policy concerns they have encountered in the course of their work. If meetings are not practical, at a minimum, they will share by email or other means information on those topics among themselves. This information will be reported back to members of the various advisory committees. They may choose to create joint study committees to research those issues and develop joint recommendations. Prior to establishing any new advisory groups related to police or policing, the mayor and/or city council shall discuss the proposal with the oversight board and give sufficient time for a response. So that's a lot. And I think we'll probably, there are a lot of different things in there to discuss. So I think we'll open it up to sort of wherever people want to jump in, and we can sort of jump back and forth between paragraphs as needed.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. I was actually going to add a couple questions just to kind of help frame the discussion. And then I maybe would suggest kind of going in a section at a time. Now that we've read through the whole thing. So I would say for framing the discussion, what are the principles that you think should be factored into determining whether or not there should be 19 advisory groups or a different number? And then what are the principles that should factor into deciding each of the groups? So those are some questions to kind of think about as you're going through this section. Commissioner Iona.
Okay, so sorry, that was an accident, but that's okay. I know I have thoughts on this, so I'm happy to share them now. So, when I did the research on Oakland and was pretty excited to see all of the influence and authority that the Oakland Police Commission had over the Oakland Police Department, I was sort of inspired and thinking that, this is something that we could be doing in Portland. But then as time went on, the light bulb came on. And when you read our charter passage that relates to our work, really what we're working on is creating an oversight board that's responsible for complaints and investigations and discipline and all of that, and also making policy recommendations to the police bureau. But we don't really have, the oversight board doesn't really have authority over the police bureau the way like Oakland does, where they can fire the police chief if they want to. So I felt like when I was reading like things like the Training Advisory Council, which to me just is a specific advisory committee that's responsible for helping the police bureau think about how do they want to design and improve their training practices and bring the community voice to that. Well, so the police bureau finds that group useful. If the police bureau wants a group, and I know it's in the settlement agreement too, but if the police bureau wants a group that does that, it should be their call. It doesn't feel like the oversight board should have anything to do with that decision. I definitely think there needs to be that collaboration and cooperation between the oversight board and the Training Advisory Council, because they might come across things policy related that maybe they'd like to come together and make a joint recommendation, as is envisioned towards the end of the proposal. So that's been my reservation when I read about this idea of bringing these advisory committees that are directly related to police bureau work, like the FIT-COG, and the TAC and the Behavioral Youth Advisory Committee. I mean, these are groups that are kind of formed by the police bureau, advise the police bureau, and for the oversight board to kind of step in. I don't know, it just seems like a step too far. So thank you for listening.
Any other questions or comments or additions to Commissioner Debbie's comment? Commissioner Casey?
So I think that Commissioner Debbie's points are very well taken. And I think this is sort of the balance that we're going to have to try to find as we have these discussions. Is I do think that there is going to be value to some of these entities potentially sort of continuing to exist where they do, and others may benefit from sort of the increased partnership with the oversight board, and the resources of the oversight board and everything like that. And I think that one of my concerns that I've voiced before and sort of continues to be a concern is creating a system that's less complicated than the one we have now, where if a person who does not follow sort of policing and police oversight as closely as, you know, all of the people who are involved in a lot of these processes do, wants to make a suggestion about policing, wants to get involved in the system, they don't have kind of different groups to choose from that all play like slightly different versions of the same role. So I do think that there is a distinction to be made sort of between, I think there is a discussion to be had about what groups are doing work that is close enough to what we want the oversight board to be doing, that it makes more sense to just have them do that work within the oversight board and be supported by the board and have sort of the one point of contact for the community, and what groups will not benefit from that level of closeness and that level of sort of independence from the police bureau that I think really only this oversight board is going to have because it is charter mandated. So I think I agree with Commissioner Debbie in terms of all of those things having value. I just think that we really need to take a close look at each of these groups individually and figure out where they have the most, where their independence sort of has the most value versus the least value. Because I know one of the other things that we've heard sort of loud and clear as a concern from City Council is they want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth from this new oversight board. And as a part of that, they want to make sure that we are not duplicating existing city processes. And they want to see this board taking on sort of whatever it is able to in terms of things that are already done by other oversight entities. So I think we need to sort of respect what we're being asked to do by City Council in that regard too, and take sort of a hard look at like, where are things duplicative versus where do they have sort of actual added value having different entities.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Anyone else would like to speak on any of this? Before I answer you, Commissioner Iona, I want to see if Commissioner Seemob, Commissioner Tirsa, or Commissioner Brown has anything to say first. Okay. Oh wait, Commissioner Tirsa.
Tirsa, she, her. I also shared similar sentiments to Commissioner Debbie, but then as I was reading through A2D, where it says that to avoid confusion from the public and to be efficient use of city resources and support of volunteers, some groups will be incorporated into the oversight board. Advisory groups being incorporated into the oversight board shall be maintained as distinct subcommittees of the oversight board for at least 2 years. So my understanding of that section is that these advisory groups that will become, or the work of these current advisory groups that will become or will be incorporated into the new oversight board will be subcommittees for at least 2 years. That's sort of how I interpret this section. And then I guess from there, I guess my question is, like, after the 2 years, and this is probably up to once the new oversight board is already established. So what happens at the 2 years? Are these subcommittees going to be kept, or is the purpose of these subcommittees to see whether they are efficient to be kept or not? But yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Tirsa. Any other comments before I call on Commissioner Iona? Okay, you have the floor, Commissioner Iona.
Thank you. So it'd be interesting, I think, to ask, I mean, we're assuming that city council is saying that they want us to, like, you know, consolidate and streamline everything. But I just sort of feel like there's a certain level of respect and deference to the police bureau having sort of say over what it does in some ways, obviously with city council oversight. So it'd be interesting to see how the police bureau feels about the advisory committees that they've created being moved over into the oversight board, for one thing. The other thing I have to say, just in practical terms, you know, I attend the PAC meetings, I mean the TAC, the Training Advisory Council, every other time, and I go to the PCC, a lot of the PCC EP meetings, you know, and I get notes from another league member about the FIT-COG members. They're all doing a lot of work, and so. And when, you know, we did that sort of rough outline of the amount of work that our oversight board is going to have based on the number of cases that could come through and the number of hearings and appeals of all that stuff. And we figured out with 33 of them, they're still going to have their hands full. And so to me, like putting all of those responsibilities onto them on top of dealing with complaints and discipline, all that is too much. I mean, we really want this to be a success. And I feel like if we pile a bunch of responsibilities on top of them, either things aren't going to happen at all on the advisory committees that will be being subsumed, or they'll just be scattered and having a hard time keeping up with everything. So thank you.
Commissioner Glenn. Thank you, Commissioner Iona.
Thank you. I apologize. I'm using my phone, so I can't find any of my settings. But I just wanted to make a general comment, just in light of taking into consideration everything that everyone said so far. I would also like to say that, you know, I think we should caution ourselves from worrying about how much work this is going to be. That's our job, is to figure things out. And, you know, if it works best to include these different groups in the board, then we will figure out a way to make it work. We're not saying that there will be less work. I'm not suggesting that either, but I'm suggesting that the work that's being done can still be done without overloading people. So I just want to caution that we don't look at that as a limiting thing as we make our decisions. We need to make our decisions based on what's best. And then once we figure out what we feel is best, we can go ahead and we can figure out how to make it work. So I just want to stay on the positive on how do we make things work, rather than, oh, I don't want to do this because it might be too much work for someone. We want the best. I want the best for the board. And I think that's the way we should look at it and not worry about things that are unknown. And we don't have any idea what's going to happen until we make the decision to try. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Iona. Or Commissioner Glenn, sorry about that. All these names, keeping track. Any other questions or comments? Thoughts? Staff?
Just wanted to note that in the chat, there's a long list of the different groups. A lot of acronyms are being used here. So just to help clarify those, there's several acronyms that may be relevant and may be helpful. This is visible to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, staff. Any other comments, thoughts, questions, changes? Suggestions? Well,
So,
go ahead.
oh, sorry.
Nope.
I would just say, I know we're going to get into whether or not some or any of these groups are going to be incorporated into the sort of oversight board. But I just encourage people, before we get into that, this is sort of our opportunity to say, okay, if they do get incorporated into the oversight board, is this what we want that to look like? So even if people don't want them to be incorporated into the oversight board, or even if people want all of them to be incorporated into the oversight board, I would welcome sort of feedback on, like, if, you know, we as a subcommittee and then possibly the full commission reaching a completely different decision decides to incorporate any number of groups into the oversight board, is this the process by which we want to recommend to the full commission that happen?
I'll also add my framing question again. So what are the principles that you think should factor into determining whether or not 19 advisory groups, or there should be 19 advisory groups or a different number? So something just to also thinking about and chew on. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, my only kind of recommendation would be things, you know, any groups that are doing duplicate work that the board would already be doing. I feel like the board should be able to take that on and but adding more work these other groups do might be just a lot of added work that this unpaid board it would bog them down. Paul had mentioned to, you know, not worry about that, but you know that I do worry about that. So that's it. Thanks.
And the other question was, what are the principles that should factor in deciding on each group? So you see that there's quite a few, 19 groups here. So something to also think about. Commissioner Iona.
Well, I may not be answering exactly, but I do think that, and it's probably pretty clear to you, I mostly do not agree with this suggestion, but I think that it's going to be important for us if the full commission decides to go ahead and recommend this. Before we do it, we need to go in it with our eyes open and understand clearly what each of these committees does, how much time they put into it. You know, I just know, like with the Training Advisory Council, I mean, they actually go to trainings and they do research on ways to do a better job with, like, they did this whole wellness thing. And so it's just so we know what it is we're handing to the oversight board, in addition to processing all of the misconduct complaints that are going to be coming through the system.
Thank you, Commissioner Iona. Commissioner Sophia.
Yes, I'm just gonna pull a little bit more from Commissioner Debbie's comment, you know, asking about what they do, and not only what they do is what they do adding value. Is it duplicative? I mean, we've talked about this. Because they're all separate, I'm assuming that there are some things that they all have in common, and maybe they're all doing some of the same things, or maybe they're doing something that another group is already doing. So I guess our job is also to look at that and to say, you guys are doing similar things, and what's the value to it? Is one group doing this better than the other group? Or can we combine some things? I just think there's going to be a long process of figuring these things out. When I say a long process, maybe I should say an extensive process to figure it out and to really nail down what each group does, what value they're bringing, and is there another group doing something similar, so we can strategize in such a way that we make things better. I know 19 groups probably are doing great work, but at the same time, how much value do we get out of 19 separate groups when it comes to the community? I mean, that's a lot of different people to go to for different things. And my thought is our job is to make it easier. And so that's my whole comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Glenn. Commissioner Casey.
Well, and I think the flip side of that, of sort of what value are those groups adding, is what value can the oversight board add to those groups? I mean, are there groups who would be well served to being a part of an entity that is going to have access to investigators, potentially analysts, potentially their own sort of advocacy apparatus, not just at a local level, but at the state and county and federal level? Basically a very well-resourced bureau that can then be sort of helping those groups implement what their mission is. I think that that's something to consider as well. And the fact that then if those members of those groups apply for and get membership on the board, they will also, in the current proposal of how the board would work, have access to all the resources that members on that board have, including potentially stipends and other sort of compensation for all the work that they're currently doing unpaid. I think that that's something to really consider is, are we currently sort of diluting all of the resources that we're putting into police oversight, and we could be focusing them more?
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Any other comments or thoughts? Commissioner Seamob, haven't heard from you. Any thoughts? Okay. Just checking. Commissioner Tirsa, just want to check in again as well with you, because we haven't heard your voice that much today.
I do not have an additional comment at this time, but thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Casey, your mic's off, so I just want to make sure that you didn't want to say anything else.
Nope, just keeping it on for if we were moving on, but nope, nothing to add.
Okay. It's seeming like we may be moving on. If no one else has any other comments, which it sounds like no one does. So the subcommittee has not finished working through this document, so no full decisions will be made today. Instead, we're moving on to next steps. Since I believe this is the last section of the document that we went through, and this will give you guys more time to consider everything that folks had said and maybe do a little bit more investigating so we can come back.
Co-chairs, before we do next steps, could I suggest there's a lot of folks who may be waiting to give public comment, to maybe give them the time first and then circle back to next steps, if that's okay with you?
I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
All right. Oh, wonderful. Okay, let's see here. We have Terrence Hayes. You are up. And then, oh boy, we have quite a few. So go ahead and start speaking. And then Yumi Delgado.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
How y'all doing? My name is Terrence Hayes. I'm a FitCog member. I really struggle with language that implies that we're not going to consider how you guys' decision impacts the lives of folks that's doing the same type of work. I heard a few members continue to comment that it's not important how we are impacted by y'all decision, but more importantly, if it's the best decision, type of language as a Black man is scary to me. And to sit and do the work that we're doing, when you look at the FitCog and the specific work we're doing in the way it impacts communities of color, and for folks to insist that it is more important for what you guys deem is what best and less important that how we feel or how our lives is impacted is pure nonsense. And as a Black man that works in these spaces, the supremacist type language makes me really uncomfortable, and I'll be willing to have that exchange with anybody about whether or not how we're impacted matters. That's first thing. Secondly, I find it really interesting that the groups that'll be impacted by clearly you guys' decision to want to have oversight over these groups are not being invited to be a part of this dialogue in a way that's not controlled by at the end of all of y'all discussions. Then it's kind of like, I hope the public has an opinion, when in fact, members of these groups, or at least the chair people of these groups, should be in an open forum in these discussions to have an opinion. And I would really recommend that at some point before y'all make a decision or push the commission to make a decision, that we have some type of open public dialogue with members in other groups, because I'm recently even finding out that we're moving in a direction where there's a oversight committee that's wanting to have kind of that level of authority. And then one of my final thoughts is that when we talk about this inclusion of other groups that turn into a subcommittee without kind of this natural grafting in as committee members, it really disregards the work that these other committee members have done, as if you guys' work or y'all position or authority should automatically continue to make those decisions without having a discussion early about board members or committee members in those other groups being allowed to be really on equal playing field as you guys. And when I read your language and we talk about when we talk about things like alternates don't have the same influence and ability to affect decision makings, and subcommittee groups generally by their very definition is legit members of commissions that go into, and the confusion language is that by proxy we wouldn't become commission members or committee members in the same way you guys are, but we would be subcommittee members in a way that we can only hope one day that that if a committee member, as you guys are, can't perform their duties, that somehow one of us will have the opportunity to step up. So some of the language in you guys' proposal is very problematic and really doesn't take into consideration very specific tasks that some of these groups do, and very specific community-based obligations in certain and specific communities that's necessary. And I believe that before you guys kind of continue down this path of opinion about these groups, we should be allowed at the table to argue whether or not we even want to be included and whether or not we even want to be there. So that's just my thought. Again, I don't mind exchanging dialogue on the issue, but I do find it problematic that we're so far ahead in this type of language without talking to members of these groups and allowing them an opinion about whether or not you guys is great. Well, sorry, I'll end with this. When we use language like benefits, but we haven't talked to these organizations, that is, again, really problematic language, because how do we talk about whether or not you guys can benefit us when y'all really don't know if we want to be there? So now I'll end with that thought. And please, if somebody has a comment about what I said, don't silence me. Allow me to respond to that comment. That's important.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Simov, your hand is.
Yes, greeting, Terrence.
And
I appreciate.
Before going on to the comment, after your comment, I do need to go on to other folks' questions. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that. Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here. I've been to many of the PCEP meetings, and I'm very grateful that you guys hold that public space. Just to let you know, we have been holding a public space for well over 18 months as well, and have been able to cater to feedback. And as much as I have been showing up to some of these specific PCEP meetings that were even very important to situations and issues that I focus on for my communities, the public meetings is an open format that we host over here, and we make sure, and we really try to make sure that a bill that over 82% of Portlanders voted on to get us here is informed through a very open and transparent and public process. So if you have felt left out, my sincere apologies. It's never been designed that way. We always want to be able to make sure that we're able to hear from everyone. And also regarding sunsetting, these were, and I think that there's also a key part of misinformation over here. A lot of what we're discussing, we're actually drafting it right now. We're talking about it. We're able to get public feedback and get your opinions as to what's important, what stays, what gets sunsetted, and what doesn't, why, or even demystify the context of sunsetting. Certain things would be subsumed, such as internal affairs. And we want to be able to make sure that we're looking at things and finding if there's a redundancy somewhere. But these are conversations that we're having not only with ourselves on a public format right here and now, but you're included in that as well. And for your presence and everybody else that's here today, we're entirely grateful. And this is what informs us. So I would ask that for anyone that may have a form of pessimism or doubt or concern, that it not necessarily be something about what we're trying to drive or create, but have it be a dialogue where we're able to hear the constructive ideas of what is your opinion, what should, what's important about certain groups, and how it is involved in the broader systems of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Simov. We have Connie next that had their hand up. We want to get to everyone's public comment.
Is it Connie or Corrine that you're calling?
Oh, Corrine, sorry.
No worries. Okay, I just wanted to mention, and thank you, Terrence, for speaking up for ACs. It was it was great. As minority members, we have a word at the table, and we hope to be listened to. I just want to make a comment that I actually had typed but was never published in the Q&A about the need for the Oversight Board to really consider a budget advisory council that would be staffed by volunteers who are in no way connected to the board membership. So with a very large budget, 5%, no less than 5% of the PPP budget equivalency, we need to have oversight. And that back needs to be completely independent from DOB. Otherwise, it lacks transparency, and it will show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Meg R.
Yeah, I basically just wanted to ask, I guess, really why or what authority like given to PAC through the charter that created PAC is being employed to kind of discuss other advisory bodies. Like I recognize that you will make recommendations to council, but it's a separate entity from PPB. So, and the advisory councils that you're talking about are within PPB. I guess I'm just wondering if you could comment on why, I guess, like why you have included that in your scope. That's all.
Thank you, Meg, and we'll go to Gina, and of course, commissioners, please take note and answer back questions once we get everyone's questions out. Gina, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to echo, I guess, some of the similar concerns that Terrence shared. I am the new vice chair for FICOG, and I'm also on the steering committee for the TAC. And the letter or the email that we recently received from this organization soliciting or wanting to get information about advisory groups with very little information, and really sent in a sort of community-based way and in a very sort of government depersonalized way, was also just sort of a first impression, is not something that a lot of us who have been communicating with each other feel, I don't know, we're just a little bit alarmed by it, number one. And number two, there's some double speak going on, particularly CMAP, I'm sorry, but you don't really get to tell us how we feel about how we perceive certain things to be happening. So I know you said about me being incorrect. I'm not incorrect about my feelings. I'm telling you how I'm perceiving this approach. And what is alarming to me is how no one, from my understanding, from this group has actually spoken really with some of the advisory boards that are at the center of your inquiry about how we would feel or how we perceive any of this work, and how it actually might have detrimental effects and impacts to the work that we're currently doing. And I mentioned this as a question in the box, and I want to reiterate this question. But there is a problem if the oversight board, which is very much needed, by the way, right? We need a community-based oversight board. We need to have this work being done. But you have to understand that if this is a punitive body, the work that many of the advisory groups do is extremely delicate diplomatic art to really try to build enough trust with PPB so that they're even willing to listen or hear some of what can be very radical or progressive reforms that we're even seeking to do in the Bureau. If we are attached in any way to a punitive body, it could have detrimental effects on our diplomatic work. And this is a known fact in any art of doing diplomatic work, right? As a teacher who has worked many years in the prisons, I don't get to be part of a disciplinary body and also teach folks on the inside because of the imbalance of power. Folks on the street who do outreach work with affiliated members who also work with the police, right? Creates extreme problems, right, with trust. And so these are things that really need to be thought about, and they need to be thought about in a way that's not unilateral, right? Like coming to the advisory boards and saying, we're really interested in improving the way oversight is done in the city of Portland, and you all are doing instrumental work, and we would like to sit down with you and explore how we can assist that work, right? But that's not how you're coming across, right? You're coming across extremely unilaterally. And it comes across as though your goal is really to get rid of the advisory boards because I'm just going to name the elephant in the room. You don't like how the advisory boards are potentially governed or being run. There's something about it, right? There's a benefit to you wanting to make this proposal. And I don't know that you're being fully transparent around that. And I think that we're going to need to have some conversations about what the real intention is behind the proposal, because I don't know that it's being fully shared, but I think it's implied. And I think those of us that are reading the language can read between the lines and we understand why and what it is that's happening. And you're not necessarily going to get support or agreement among many of us who've been doing this work. And not even, I mean, I haven't even been doing this work in the advisory groups for as long as some other people. Some of these folks in these advisory groups have been doing long established work for years. And so it just comes across as really, to be honest, not only uncollaborative, but to just kind of unprofessional. So I'm really hoping that when in moving forward in how you're considering to do this work, that not only you're reimagining maybe some of the language that's being used, but you reconsider the approach that you're actually taking to working with some of these groups. That I don't know that you're going to really be building allies or supporters in the work that you're doing with how it is currently being handled. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Commissioner Dan Handelman.
Oh, good evening. This is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the PAC, and I'm enjoying being able to watch your work. I'm hoping that you will consider backing up this conversation and thinking about just taking it and putting it into the bin of items for future consideration. It really feels like this is a huge lift for the PAC to be taking on when we only have 2 months left in our entire mission. And really, what's probably going to happen is the board has to start doing its work, investigating the cases, imposing discipline, and then see if it has capacity to do anything like what you're describing. And simultaneously, look at these other advisory boards, and see if they're not being able to function or having duplicative work that can be incorporated into the board. And then in the future, maybe this idea could work. But I think that doing it from day one is too much. We often say in the peace movement, people say, why don't you have just one peace group that does everything, like works on Cuba and Iraq and everything else? It's because it's like rock bands. There's different rock bands. They all have really good music that they do on their own. Sometimes they get together and they play at Live Aid or something, but they are much more effective working on the smaller, kind of music that they do well. And that's what these groups are. These are the individual rock bands that are playing songs that they're very good at. There are also things that are in the settlement agreement that are specific to, for instance, Training Advisory Council has to hear quarterly reports about force data, and that you're adding to the workload of this new board. That'll be a lot of work for the chairs of that board, for the staff of the board, and when we penciled out the budget, I think that basically the staff is already at its wit's end, just trying to arrange the community meetings, the hearings, and then whatever subcommittees are already going to be generated from this body by itself without adding more subcommittees by incorporating other people's work. So I'm really encouraging you to step back, let go of this, the idea of transferring any more advisory boards. And my last comment, I guess, is something I put in the Q&A, and I don't know if anybody saw it, but I think the real problem is that the people who are sitting on these other boards, and you kind of just heard this from some of their members, are not interested in looking at individual cases of misconduct. They just want to do policy review. And once they become members of the new board, they have to be able to look at those individual cases. And so those are my comments, and I thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Handelman. Nathan Castle.
Hey everyone, thank you for inviting public comment. My name is Nathan Castle, he, him pronouns. I am chair of Training Advisory Council as well as a PSEP member, but I'm here independently. Opinions are my own. I'm just going to run through my thoughts and try to keep this quick. One thing I see on this list, there was this conversation about the 19 groups. I think this list is inflated. I think there are several of these groups that no longer exist. So 19 is probably not the right number, and it's probably not the current number. I think let's go through some of this discussion. I think doesn't consider the diversity that these advisory groups bring to the system. And I think especially like I know through CAG, conversations in CAG, that groups like the Muslim Advisory Council, Slavic Advisory Council, Latino Advisory Council do really good, important, impactful work. And I think their voices should be elevated in the process. And I really hope that PAC will either invite them or actually reach out and directly engage with those advisory councils. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that or a few other things, the advisory Alliance for Safer Communities no longer exists. That has been sunsetted for a while, so that gets you to 18 right there. I also want to echo Gina's comment. There is a wide variety of relationships with the Police Bureau reflected among the advisory councils that exist and advisory groups. Some of them aren't advisory councils, and they have very different relationships that are pretty foundational to how they work and how they can be effective. And I think about the work that I do as a Training Advisory Council member, including attending trainings and seeing dry runs and even having members observe live trainings with real officers. That I don't think works as well when you're an arm of or an agent of an enforcement entity. I did see earlier versions of the draft. I think maybe it was called an outline. I see the current version. I think the current version is a marked improvement, and I hope the evolution of this work continues down that path. I do concur with a lot of Commissioner Iona's statements, and I think, I really want to see, in addition to the approach change that the PAC subcommittee is taking, I think some of the content is probably going to need to change too, and probably will if it reflects the input of the advisory groups. And then the final thing I just want to say is that it's a little troubling to see this pattern of just constantly referring to the 80% approved measure for anything that any of the subcommittees does. When you think about public input and the 19 months or whatever of meetings, I don't think anyone really anticipated or expected that, asking council to sunset or absorb or remove or whatever existing advisory councils was in scope for this. I know I was really surprised to see the earlier draft of the outline. You could say shocked even. And so, yes, I'm late to this process. I sort of assumed that the PAC was going to be doing good work and not, overreaching like this. Obviously, that was a mistake. I plan to watch many hours of your past meetings to catch up. And I plan to be at every single meeting going forward because I, don't really trust the process at this point. And so I would ask you to reconsider whether, this has really been an effective public forum if it's, not what it has been advertised to be.
Thank you. Thank you. And Yumi Delgado, you're, I think, our last.
Thank you. Yumi Delgado, he, him. I'm the vice chair of the Citizen Review Committee. And I can say on behalf of the Citizen Review Committee that we are over the moon excited to be replaced as part of this process. That being said, speaking as a civilian and as someone who has attended more PAC meetings than any sane civilian would do, I echo the concerns raised by Commissioner Handelman and Commissioner Iona, and I hold space for the concerns raised by my colleagues on some of these other community advisory bodies. I think in its current form, some of what is being under consideration by the subcommittee seems to me to be outside of scope. I really do think that CRC and I think also PSEP and all mayoral or city council instituted bodies should consider sunsetting and consolidating, but I don't believe it is part of scope for this organization to tell the Bureau what to do with their own internal advisory bodies, especially insofar as they often use them as a means of informal outreach to those minority communities, right? I have a much bigger concern though, which I raised in the comments, which is this is a pretty hard sell, this whole package. It has to go to city council, it has to go to DOJ, it has to go to collective bargaining. I am concerned that the proposal to eliminate internal affairs, again, is outside of scope, and it seems to wholly ignore internal affairs obligation to investigate criminal complaints, which is outlined in Directive 0333.00 of the Portland Police Bureau's directive. So I think it's fine for this body to say we do not want internal affairs to retain their part of the complaint process, but I don't think you have the authority to sunset internal affairs. And I also question the advisability of picking a fight with the Inspector General over their job title. I think that's perhaps not a great use of this body's time or political capital. But I think if we're going to have that conversation with or if we're going to have that conversation about internal affairs, we really need to separate the complaint component of their job from the criminal investigation component. And I guess I'm a little troubled that I don't see any mention of that, nor have I heard any discussion of it. I haven't been able to come to every greater systems meeting, but it seems like a pretty large oversight, or a pretty large thing that still needs to be addressed. So thank you for all your work, and I'm sure I will see you at future meetings.
Thank you for your comments, and to all the folks commenting today. We'll go to Commissioner Casey, and then we'll go to next steps.
Certainly. So I just wanted to address, because there was a direct question from, I believe, Meg earlier about sort of where the PAC derives its authority from. And I felt that since it was a direct question with a pretty simple answer, I would just go ahead and address that quickly. So we don't have the authority to make changes to city code. We don't have the authority to create a new bureau. We have the authority to make recommendations to city council. And those recommendations are supposed to support our goal of implementing what was placed in the city charter by the ballot measure that was placed by the people of Portland. So that's all the authority that we have, is we can make those recommendations. We as a group are making the determination in our subcommittees and then in our larger commission what recommendations we think will implement that charter language and will create a board that is the kind of board that was envisioned by the people of Portland. And then ultimately, when those recommendations go to city council, they are the ones who have the authority to actually implement those recommendations, and will have to do so in conjunction with the US Department of Justice, working out how that fits into the settlement agreement. So that is where any of our authority to make any recommendations is derived from. And ultimately, that is what we are able to do. Is we are able to discuss. Our subcommittee is able to forward recommendations to the commission. The commission is able to vote on those recommendations and potentially send them to city council. And then ultimately, city council will be the deciding authority.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. And with that, we will go to next steps. I'll pass it over to co-chairs or staff to talk about next steps.
Co-chairs, would you like? No, I see.
I missed that, staff.
Yeah, you broke up for a second there, Samir.
I think I saw Co-Chair Seema put a 1 second up, so I think I was giving some space there.
Thank you. He moved
Appreciate
the
it.
screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get back to my notes over here because I've had everything on my screen for a moment ago. I'm not getting myself collected here. If you have it up, Casey, I wouldn't mind you running it.
Certainly. Can we go on to the next slide? Oh, next steps doesn't have a. All right. So next steps. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we are currently in the process of drafting the areas of agreement for this subcommittee. So we've gone through the entire document at this point. We still do need to have those conversations about the individual existing committees and come to agreement or have a vote on what to forward to the full commission on each of those. So that is going to be sort of the next part of this process. We will then review the entire document again for an opportunity for anyone to make changes, additions, subtractions, or just comments that they want the full commission to be aware of when that document is forwarded to them. And then once this subcommittee has wrapped its work on a proposed areas of agreement, that will go to the full commission that will review it and again have an opportunity to make changes before ultimately approving it and having it become sort of part of our body of work that's ultimately going to turn into the city code recommendations to city council. So those are the next steps. I know we also have some community outreach events coming up. We have a full commission meeting on Thursday. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, staff. But that meeting, as all of our meetings are, will be open to the public. And so I encourage people to continue to engage with sort of every part of the process. And let me know if I'm missing anything.
Yes, I'll just put out between meetings. Oh, go ahead, staff.
Yeah, so between meetings, members can propose any changes in track changes just before the next meeting of the subcommittee. And so that ideally that would be by Saturday, the 17th, so that the document can be recirculated on Sunday. And what that'll do is allow for members to have a chance to read their colleagues' proposed changes prior to, with enough time to read it before the next meeting, which is June 20th. And during the next meeting on June 20th, we'll work through those newly proposed changes received in advance, as well as, I guess, it would be any items flagged for further discussion, but I guess there aren't any outside of A3, which is the section on the staff changes. And then finally, co-chairs will be proposing some revisions as well based off of the feedback to the subsection A2, just based on feedback and additional research that is coming in over time. And again, I wanted to say thank you to those who've been responding to those questions going out. There's been a lot that's added to the conversation, and it's down, the written portion of it is down at the bottom of the document. Thanks.
Commissioner Seamob, are you ready for us? Hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to go into some thank yous, particularly for our participants.
Before going into thank yous, I just want to make sure that we didn't have anything for the garden plots. Do we have anything?
The only thing was previously mentioned, which is that highlighted text from structural oversight. There was a proposed update to it to add appointed officials, and that would require a revisitation of the structural oversight documents. That'll be held until the next phase for that. And while I have the floor, I will just confirm there is a full commission meeting this Thursday, and it does have a briefing with the Portland Police Commanding Officers Association, which is the collective bargaining unit representing lieutenants in the Portland Police Bureau. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, co-chair Seamob, you want to do your thank yous?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think especially this meeting was one that was really, really informative. I really appreciate our participants that came in, our attendees today, Corinne, Gina, Meg, Nathan, Narelle, Terrence, Yumi. The feedback that you guys gave today is actually heard, and a lot of which I find myself aligned with. A lot of this is actual open discussion that allows us to be informed. So really, really, really appreciate you all coming here. And I look forward to the additional and the continued participation, which we're wrapping up this phase 5, and we're going into phase 6, which is our final phase before we deliver our recommendations after August 31st, whichever date that winds up being with the city council. So between now and then, it's grind time, and we do need you. And I really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Seamob. And so we like to this time thank co-chairs. Sorry, my brain's kind of broken today. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to our attendees. And first and foremost, you can, sorry, my brain. Hold on, I just want to make sure I got this right. Yes, as a reminder, you can submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or post email. That's very important. So all those comments are really, really important for us to do our work. And thank you all to the members who attended today and your contributions. Thank you to the interpreters. And finally, thank you to members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts. Very important, and your questions. If you have not already signed up for email updates, please also sign up to receive those from the PAC. And the meeting of the next full commission is scheduled for Thursday, June 15th. Subcommittee's next meeting is Tuesday, June 20th. at 6:30 p.m. It is now 9:17 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.